The wind whispered through the ancient trees that lined the outskirts of Adams, Tennessee. The sun had barely set, leaving behind streaks of orange and crimson fading into the darkening sky. The Bell family farm lay silent, save for the distant call of an owl and the soft rustle of leaves. To anyone passing by, it seemed like a peaceful homestead, untouched by the troubles of the world. But those who had lived in the area long enough knew better. The legend of the Bell Witch was whispered in hushed tones at church gatherings and around the hearths of neighboring farms. They spoke of a malevolent spirit that had haunted the Bell family for years, a presence that could not be seen, yet could be felt, heard, and sometimes smelled. No one knew its origins, only that it had arrived quietly, and once it had chosen its target, escape was impossible. John Bell, the patriarch, was a hard-working man, respected in the community. Yet, even the strongest men have fears, and John's was a quiet dread that gripped him in the dead of night. He would often wake to the sensation of being watched, a cold chill crawling over his skin, and soft, almost human whispers drifting from the corners of his home. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Wooden doors that had been tightly shut would creak open on their own. The family's animals grew restless, neighing or clucking in the darkness as if sensing an unseen threat. At first, John brushed it off as wind or the skittishness of farm animals, but soon there were no easy explanations. One evening, as Mary Bell, his wife, hung laundry outside, she heard laughter, soft, mocking, high-pitched, coming from the edge of the woods. She spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing, only the rustling of leaves, whispering as if the trees themselves were alive and speaking secrets. "John, did you hear that?" Mary asked that night, her voice trembling. "I heard nothing," he replied firmly, though unease settled in his chest like a stone. But John, too, would soon learn that hearing nothing was not the same as there being nothing. As weeks passed, the disturbances grew bolder. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Objects would move from one room to another when no one was looking. John and his children reported feeling invisible hands tugging at their hair, or sudden, inexplicable slaps across their faces. Sometimes, the house would fill with a sweet, nauseating scent, a perfume that had no source, or the air would grow bitterly cold in the middle of summer. Katie Bell, the youngest daughter, was the first to speak of the witch directly. Sitting by the fireplace, her eyes wide with terror, she whispered to her mother, "She doesn't like me. She's always here, watching me." Mary tried to comfort her daughter, hiding her own fear. She's just a story, Katie. Nothing more." But deep down, Mary knew it was more than a story. One night, as the family gathered for supper, the candles flickered violently, plunging the room into a dance of shadows. Then, a voice, rasping and cold, echoed through the walls. "I see you, John Bell. I see your fear, and I will not leave until it is mine." The family froze. Even the dogs trembled, whimpering at the unseen presence. By the following week, the Bell family's lives had changed entirely. Sleep was scarce, and the constant pressure of the witch's presence wore down their nerves. John, a man of logic and reason, began consulting neighbors and local clergy, seeking advice, prayers, and protective charms. But the spirit seemed immune to all attempts at confrontation. Neighbors who tried to investigate reported hearing strange sounds, footsteps pacing across empty rooms, doors slamming. even disembodied voices chanting unintelligible words in the darkness. Some claimed to see shadowy figures, their forms shifting, almost human yet distorted. It became impossible for the bells to ignore the warnings. The witch was real, and she was relentless. One stormy night, lightning illuminated the sky, casting grotesque shadows across the farm. John was awakened by a sound he would never forget. Soft, deliberate scratching at his bedroom door. He opened it, heart hammering, to find the hallway empty. But the voice came again, closer this time. Leave, or suffer. Katie ran to her father, clutching his sleeve. Daddy, she's here, in my room. John's blood ran cold. He had always protected his family, but now he felt powerless against something unseen, ancient, and merciless. As the storm raged outside, the Bell family huddled together, realizing that the presence that had haunted them was not just a ghostly nuisance. It was a curse, bound to their very lives. And the question that lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken, was one they could not answer. How long could a family survive when a spirit refuses to leave? Days passed, and the Bell family began noticing signs that went beyond simple hauntings. Tools left in the barn were found broken, as if shredded by invisible claws. Crops in the garden wilted overnight, even when the soil was fertile and watered. Chickens stopped laying eggs, and the air itself seemed heavier, charged with an unexplainable dread. John rode into town one afternoon, hoping to find answers. At the general store, he overheard whispers among the locals. Tales of strange figures seen in the woods near the Bell property. No one dared to speak openly, but their eyes betrayed fear. They say she waits in the trees, murmured a shopkeeper, lowering his voice. John nodded, though he felt his blood run cold. I know, he replied quietly. I've seen her. Even as he spoke, he couldn't describe her properly. She was not always visible, yet her presence was undeniable, like a shadow that could seep into walls. A chill that crawled under the skin. The Bell children, especially Katie, became restless. Sleep eluded them, and when they did rest, nightmares consumed them. Visions of a tall, shadowed figure, face obscured, standing at the foot of their beds. Her voice, soft but cruel, would whisper their deepest fears aloud. One night, Katie woke to a cold hand resting on her shoulder. She screamed, but no one came. The whispers spoke her name, over and over, until she could not tell where the dream ended and reality began. Her brother, Jesse, tried to comfort her. It's just a bad dream, he said, though his own voice shook. Katie shook her head. It's not. She's here. She's always here. Mary, their mother, began placing charms and herbs around the house, hoping to protect her children. But even these offerings seemed to fail. The witch did not merely haunt, she toyed with them, testing the boundaries of fear. One evening, a stranger arrived at the farm. He introduced himself as Richard Powell, a local preacher with a reputation for confronting spirits. John, desperate, invited him in. Richard carried a small bag of items, iron keys, salt, and a book of prayers. I've heard the stories, Richard said, eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. Some spirits are not merely angry, they are intelligent. They can sense fear and feed on it. This one, she is cunning. And she will not leave without a fight. That night, Richard performed a protective ritual in the Bell living room. Candles flickered, shadows danced across the walls, and for a moment, it seemed as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then the air turned cold, and the faint laughter began. She knows you're here, Richard said, voice taught, and she does not like visitors. Suddenly, a chair slid across the room by itself, narrowly missing Jessie. The children screamed. John grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron lantern, but Richard held him back. "Do not engage her directly," he warned. "She wants you afraid. That is her power." That night, the Bell family gathered in the parlor, the storm outside rattling windows and doors. A voice, clear and chilling, filled the room. "John Bell, you cannot hide. Your children, your fear, it belongs to me." Katie shrieked, throwing herself into her mother's arms. Mary tried to soothe her, but even she could not ignore the tremor of terror that ran through her own body. Richard, however, remained composed. "She is drawing strength from your dread. Do not give it to her." He instructed firmly, "Stand together. Fear alone fuels her." But the voice continued, taunting, growing closer. The air thickened and the shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, stretching unnaturally, as if trying to reach the living. Suddenly, a mirror in the corner cracked, the surface spider-webbing outward. Inside the fractured reflection, the family swore they saw a dark figure staring back at them, eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Richard stepped forward, raising a cross. "By faith and by name, I command you to leave this home." For a moment, silence fell. The candle stopped flickering. Then, the mirror exploded with a shower of sparks and shards, leaving a small hole where the figure seemed to vanish. The family was shaken, but alive. The next day, John rode into the surrounding woods to investigate, trying to trace the origin of the witch's power. Twisted trees and dense underbrush created a labyrinth, but he pressed forward. Somewhere deeper in the woods, he found a small clearing with strange markings carved into the bark. Symbols unfamiliar, yet eerily deliberate. A sudden rustle made him freeze. Out of the shadows, a whisper. "Do not come closer, John Bell, or you will never return." He felt a cold hand graze his shoulder, though the forest was empty. Panic surged, and he raced back to the farm, knowing one thing for certain. The Bell Witch was no ordinary spirit. She was watching, learning, and growing stronger. That night, as he lay awake, John realized that the real horror had only begun. The witch's presence was no longer confined to the house. She had marked the land itself. Wherever the Bells went, they would carry her curse with them, like a shadow that could never be shaken. Night came quickly over the Bell farm, and with it a darkness that seemed heavier than usual. The air was thick and still, the kind that presses against the skin and makes every breath feel like a struggle. The family gathered in the main room, each shadow on the walls appearing alive, shifting unnaturally. Katie refused to leave her mother's side. Jessie, though older and braver, could not hide the tremor in his voice. Even John, who had faced storms, wild animals, and harsh winters, felt a primal fear crawling under his skin. The candles flickered as a cold draft swept through the room, though every window and door was closed. Then, from the corner, a voice. "You think you are safe, but the night belongs to me." The family froze. Mary clutched Katie, whispering reassurances that even she did not believe. Suddenly, the walls seemed to breathe, pulsing slightly, as if the house itself were alive. Shadows stretched across the floors, forming shapes that resembled twisted faces, mouths opening silent screams. Jesse pointed toward the hallway. There's someone there!" he cried. John stood, lantern in hand, heart hammering. "Show yourself!" he demanded, voice cracking with fear. The shadow moved, sliding along the wall like liquid darkness. It stopped, forming a rough silhouette of a woman. Her eyes glowed faintly, red as embers, and her lips curled in a mocking smile. Richard Powell, who had returned to the house that evening, whispered urgently, "Do not engage her. Stand together, and do not let fear control you." But the Bell children could not hide their terror. The witch's gaze seemed to pierce into their minds, pulling out every worry, every nightmare, every secret fear. Then the room shook violently. Objects flew from shelves, smashing against walls. The chandelier swung, threatening to collapse. A chilling wind tore through the room, scattering papers and extinguishing the candles. Katie screamed as an invisible force seemed to push her to the floor. John lunged to help her, but his arms passed through nothing, as if she were being held by an unseen grip. The voice laughed, soft and cruel, echoing from every corner. "Your family is mine. Your fear feeds me." Mary tried to pray, voice trembling, but even her words seemed to fall flat, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Richard shouted words of command, old prayers and incantations, but the spirit only laughed louder, a sound that scraped against the soul. For hours the house remained under siege. Then, as suddenly as it began, the disturbances stopped. The air grew still, the shadows retreated. But the family knew the reprieve was temporary, just a pause in the witch's relentless gaze. In the following days, signs of psychological strain became apparent. Katie stopped sweeping without her mother nearby. Jessie spoke of hearing whispers even in the fields, and John began waking in the night, drenched in sweat, feeling invisible hands clutching at his chest. Mary began to notice strange markings appearing on the children's skin, faint scratches that would vanish by morning, leaving no trace but unease. It was as if the witch were claiming them, marking them as part of her domain. Richard returned once more, grave-faced. "She grows stronger," he warned. "Her power is tied to your fear and despair. If you cannot confront it, it will consume everything you love." That night, the family sat together in silence, listening to the sounds of the house, the floorboards creaking, the wind rattling the windows, the faint scratching that seemed to come from the walls themselves. No one dared speak, for fear that a single word might provoke the witch. A week later, John ventured into the woods again, seeking any clue, any weakness in the witch's hold. The forest seemed alive with malevolence. Trees bent unnaturally, and the wind whispered unintelligible words. He stumbled upon a clearing he did not recognize, a ring of stones, blackened with age, arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air, soft but insistent. "Leave this place, or you will never see your children again." John felt a sharp pain in his head, visions flashing before his eyes. Katie alone, crying, Jessie running through dark corridors, Mary screaming in despair. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Then silence, only the faint rustle of leaves. The clearing was empty, yet the weight of the witch's presence lingered. He returned home, trembling, knowing now more than ever that the Bell Witch was no ordinary haunting. She was a curse, bound to their very lives, feeding on terror, testing limits, and preparing for something far worse. Night had fallen over the Bell farm with an oppressive weight, heavier than any night before. The air itself seemed charged, humming with unseen energy. The family gathered in the parlor once more, a circle of trembling souls holding on to each other, hoping sheer proximity could fend off the unseen terror. Richard Powell, the preacher, knelt in the center, scattering salt and chanting prayers he had memorized years ago. Candles flickered violently, shadows twisting into grotesque shapes across the walls. The room felt smaller, as if the darkness itself pressed inward, squeezing the breath from their lungs. Then the voice came, not from a corner, not from the walls, but from inside their heads. "You cannot escape me. I am always with you." Katie clutched her mother, her eyes wide. Jesse tried to sound brave, but his teeth chattered. John's hands shook as he gripped the lantern. Even Richard paused mid-prayer, sensing the full weight of the witch's power. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a single figure standing at the far end of the room. Tall, with long dark hair that seemed to writhe like living smoke, and eyes glowing faint red. She observed them silently. "Leave, or I take what is mine," the figure hissed, voice dripping with malice. The family froze. It was not just a ghost. They saw intelligence, cunning, and cruelty in her every movement. The room grew colder, the very air biting at their skin. Richard stepped forward, voice resolute. "In the name of faith, I command you to leave." The figure's lips twisted into a smile. She raised her hand, and suddenly the floorboards beneath their feet shuddered. The furniture rattled violently. Objects flew across the room as if propelled by invisible hands. The family screamed, huddled together, but the witch's eyes never wavered. In the chaos, the witch spoke again, softer now, almost intimate. "Fear me, or I claim you all." John realized the truth too late. The witch fed not merely on fear, but on hesitation, doubt, and despair. Every second they faltered, she grew stronger. He turned to his family, shouting, "Together! We face this together!" A family locked hands, focusing their minds, willing themselves not to cower, not to scream. Richard's chants grew louder, more insistent. For a moment, the witch's form flickered, shadows wavering like smoke in the wind. Then, silence fell. When the first light of dawn broke, the Bell farm was quiet. The storm had passed. Candles burned low, but no shadow moved across the walls. The family emerged cautiously from the parlor, hearts pounding. Katie clung to her mother, eyes still wide with fear. Jesse rubbed his hands together, voice shaking. John surveyed the room, noting that nothing had moved, no objects disturbed, no marks left behind. Richard looked grave. "She is still here," he said quietly. "Her power has limits, but she waits, patient, cunning. You have survived, but the curse is not gone." The family nodded, understanding that life would never be the same. Every glance into the shadows, every creak of a floorboard, would now carry the weight of fear. Weeks later, life returned to a fragile normal. Crops began to grow, animals calmed, and the family tried to rebuild their routines. Yet, even in the brightest days, there were signs, small, unsettling reminders of what lingered. A cold draft in a warm room, a whisper too soft to catch, a shadow moving against the flow of light. One evening, Katie was playing near the edge of the woods when she paused, staring into the trees. She tilted her head, listening. A soft laugh floated through the air, barely audible. "You cannot forget me." She shivered, running back to the house. That night, John stared out the window, seeing nothing but darkness, yet feeling it watching. And so the Bell Witch remained, an eternal, invisible presence, bound to the land, to the family, and perhaps to anyone who dared venture too close. Some would say the legend is only a story, but the Bells knew the truth. Some curses never end. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a chilling promise. The darkness watches, waits, and returns when you least expect it.